Good evening, and I just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight to mark the launch of what I believe to be a particularly important and consequential, yeah, I like that word, consequential feat of investigative journalism. Of course, I'm Batento Batts, I'm Dean of the Cronkite School, and I'm exceedingly proud to present Lethal Restraint. This is a project that we've been working on now for a number of years with our partners at the Associated Press and Frontline, and through our Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. And I'm really pleased to be able to bring this to the Cronkite community. Again, this is a major collaboration between the Associated Press's Global Investigations team and the Howard Centers for Investigative Journalism, both here at ASU and at the University of Maryland and Frontline. What these news organizations accomplished by working together on this project is something no one has successfully been able to do before, including our own federal government. And that is to determine how many times someone died in the United States after police subdued them with force, and that force that is not supposed to be lethal, as was the case that we saw with George Floyd, who was murdered in Minneapolis in 2020, where no gun was ever fired. Every day, police across the country use physical restraints, tasers, takedowns, and other tactics in encounters that are not supposed to be fatal. In many, many cases, those instances end peacefully. But sometimes what is known as less lethal force can still end in death. The federal government has struggled for years to track these types of deaths, and the little information it collects is incomplete. Without reliable data, our nation has been left with no way to understand when the patterns of when things go wrong. Policymakers have not had all the information that they need to create informed, data-driven policies to help prevent more of these deaths. That's where this project comes in. Lethal restraint documents more than 1,000 non-shooting deaths involving law enforcement from 2012 through 2021. The Joint Reporting Project created an unprecedented interactive story and database of these cases, which are now available to the public. This project also represents both a professional and personal milestone for me. Before I was dean here, I was the journalism director for the Scripps Howard Foundation. And one of my passion projects was helping to dream up a university based investigative journalism center that would not only train the next generation of investigative journalists, but also produce national multimedia investigations that professional partners like the Associated Press and Frontline would want to publish and produce. The Scripps Howard Foundation, backed by the family of news pioneer Roy W. Howard, created two Howard Centers for Investigative Journalism, one here at Cronkite and the other, as we know, at the University of Maryland's Merrill College of Journalism. 5 years later, Howard Center reporters at our two programs worked side by side with the Associated Press to report out this project. More stories will publish soon, and later this month, on April 30th, the project will be featured in a major documentary film from PBS Frontline. Lethal Restraint is a testament to the quality of the student work done in the Howard Centers. It is a testament to the quality of journalism that is possible in America. I'll now turn things over to tonight's moderator, who will introduce our esteemed panelists and lead tonight's program. Our moderator tonight is none other than Mark Greenblatt, who is the executive editor of the Cronkite School's Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. Before joining Cronkite, Mark spent more than a decade as a senior national investigative correspondent in Washington, D.C. for Scripps News. Mark is also on the board of directors of the Investigative Reporters and Editors, the largest professional journalism association in the United States. And he serves as that organization's elected treasurer. Mark?
Dean Batts, thank you so much for that amazing introduction and all of your words about this project. I have to say, I am genuinely honored to be sitting here among the journalists who did what I think is one of the most consequential investigative projects in some time. This is an important story, and the way it was tackled was done and told in a beautiful way, and in an impactful way. And to be able to dive into how you did the story tonight, this is going to be an important conversation, and it's so good to be up here. I'm asked by our events team to remind all of those of you who are here in person that you should know that there is a reception that will follow this event, where there will be food and some amazing refreshments. Joining us here on this panel is Ron Nixon, a vice president of the Associated Press, who, among his many duties at the AP, he oversees the global investigations team, and Ron has flown in to be here with us tonight. Also, we're joined by Serginho Roseblood, who is the director of the Frontline film that Dean Batts referenced at the top of this event. And he's also a video producer for the Associated Press, and he works in the global investigations team. Also here with us on Zoom via virtual, joining us tonight, is Maud Bielman, who's the collaborations editor these days at the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism, but she's also famous for having been the founding executive editor of the Howard Center, and we thank you for your prior service, your current service, and your future service, Maud. Good to see you.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Taylor Stevens, who's here with us tonight, got her master's degree of investigative journalism here at Cronkite. She went on to become a reporter for the AP on this very project, and today works as a television reporter in Utah. Nathan Collins is also joining us virtually. He got his master's degree in investigative journalism here. He's a government accountability reporter for a North Texas NPR station. And Tirza Christopher is with us. She got her master's degree after working in the Howard Center, and she just finished up a year-long fellowship at NPR in their investigations team. And Lauren Mucciolo is the executive producer of the Howard Center today. She has produced a dozen or more Frontline films in her time, and I have the pleasure of working with her on a daily basis. She's amazing. Good to see you, Lauren. Thanks for joining us. Without further ado, I want to start off this evening, Ron, by just talking to you. This is a major project. It was a major undertaking. And I'm wondering, what is it that the Associated Press thought it wanted to accomplish when it assembled this massive team, Frontline, and also working with students at the Howard Center? What were your goals?
Well, first of all, good evening to everybody. Thanks for having us here. Immensely proud of this project. I think that honestly, I don't know that this is what we thought when the initial pitch came in. So the goal, and this came from 4 reporters on the global investigative team: Justin Pritchard, Reese Dunklin, Mitch Weiss, and Bert Moore, who came to me talking about a project around deaths in police custody that were non-shooting deaths. And it all emanated from there. And I think as they reported more, they saw that we would need more firepower to be able to do this, because the scale of what they wanted to do with the project would say it exceeded the capacity of the AP, but it exceeded capacity of how many people we could actually deploy from the AP to actually accomplish this type of work. Plus, there were other expertise that we would need to. So from there, I think we started with the Howard Centers here, and then the Howard Centers at Maryland was invited, and then we were talking with Frontline about what would Trevino do on his fellowship with Frontline, and then it was like, oh, well, we have this project, so we should make a film. So all of those things came together, but it all started, I wouldn't say quite modestly, because when the reporters came to me about this, and they obviously saw the potential to do something that had not been done before. And my only thing to them was just like, aim for the fences, and just go for it. You do it, and I'll figure out how to pay for it.
Just following up, we were talking yesterday, and I mean, this is a definitive project on this topic that's ever been done in America. But I'm struck because you have a personal story that begins earlier in your career, when there was a video that was once sort of leaked to you. You want to tell that story? Because the story didn't get solved back then,
Right.
for the country, but
Right.
what was that about?
It's a really long story, but my first investigative story was someone, they didn't leak the video to me, but the police had given me this video of that they were doing around policing drinking and driving. And they had been given camcorders by Mothers Against Drunk Driving to do these PSAs, public service announcements, that to keep people from. So I got the video from the police, and I was supposed to do like this fluff piece about, look what the Columbia, South Carolina Police Department is doing. But someone called me and said, have you seen the video? And I told them I was watching it. They told me to fast forward to the end. And they then told me, once I told them what I saw, they were like, oh, no, you don't have the video. So they told me to go to the Waffle House the next day. So Woodward and Bernstein have the garage with Deep Throat. I got the Waffle House. So I was told to go to the Waffle House the next day and ask for this hostess named Julie. And she came out with this little brown paper bag and handed it to me. And after I ordered breakfast, I went back and watched the video. The cops had accidentally recorded themselves beating this black man. And they knew enough that they didn't give me that version of the, hey, but anyway, I was, so I mentioned to you, I was a music major in college. And so I was writing music reviews and stuff for them. But I didn't think about doing investigative journalism. So I did this story, and I didn't think anything else about it. I just went about my business, back to writing music stuff. But the cop ended up getting arrested. He later pleaded guilty, and I got a summons from the local solicitor they're trying to figure out how I got the videotape. So they were saying I told my editor I needed to go testify and tell them how I got the videotape. And he was like, no, we don't do that. So I'm right. That's not how it's done. And he's like, we go to jail to protect our sources. And I was like, jail? Like Law and Order jail? Like jail, right? And he was like, yeah, we go to jail. But I was like, dude, I don't do jail, right? Like, I don't. So anyway, long story short, I did not go to jail. The cop ended up pleading guilty, and he I I don't know if he was the first, but one of the first law enforcement. But this is early 90s, I think. This is a long time ago, basically. But anyway, it's amazing that that these types of things continue to happen, because I believe I did that right before the Rodney King.
Hmm.
I believe that's when that happened.
So you've seen all these things. It's your first investigative story ever that really you had an encounter with this challenging topic.
Mhm.
And fast forward to yesterday when you're sitting in the Howard Center here at Arizona State University with students talking about investigative journalism, talking about the impact and the potential for really changing the world that this work can have.
Mhm.
And we look up behind you and we see on MSNBC that there was another incident that had nothing to do with
Mhm.
the reporting of this project, but that had happened. New information had come out in California,
Right.
and now they were back referencing to this
Mhm.
project, which has become something that clearly has transformed the national conversation already around this topic. And I'm just wondering what you felt, what you were thinking.
Well, in full transparency, I bribed MSNBC to time it with me sitting talking to the students. So, I mean, I confess. I, actually, it was a surprise because my back was turned to this, and you guys alerted me to the fact that it was up there. I think that you are correct that it is beginning this conversation because, in addition, like last night, I saw that Roland Martin was talking about this on his program, and referencing and then I saw Taylor on a program and talking about the same thing, right? And all in the same day. So these three things are all happening the same day, a week after we actually ran. So again, I think that it shows that the reason that we need to do this kind of work is because if we don't, no one else will, not even the federal government who's charged with doing this. And I think it speaks to the power of what good investigative journalism can do in terms of being a public service, and answering a question of something like what the reporters were saying when they initially approached them, like how many people actually die, in encounters with police. Like nobody knows that. And so I think it's a valuable service that shows why we still need journalism, really good investigative journalism in this country.
I want to transition right from that, Ron. Thank you so much for that. And I want to go over to Nathan for a minute, because Nathan, you as a graduate student here at Cronkite, you were charged with digging through document after document after document, case after case, and reading through the details of cases that often involved the deaths of persons of color. And you are an early career journalist of color yourself. And I'm wondering what impact that had on you, and what you learned from this, and why you continued to work through all of these cases.
Right. Well, I'll say that I think, I saw probably a fraction of what the rest of the team saw, just because the project went beyond when I was at Cronkite. I think it was a balancing act of like trying to make sure that you were still able to get your assignments done, and like make sure you're still able to do the work that you said you were going to do, while also, like you said, sifting through some pretty traumatic stuff. And so for me, it was a balancing act of getting everything done, and tempering that with, the possible impact and the possible outcomes of, an investigation like this. Not to say that it was easy. I mean, I'm sure Maud can attest to many meetings with about this issue. but I think at the end of the day, like the impact has been, you know, a lot so far in a very short amount of time. And it kind of just brings everything into perspective of like, you know, kind of like what Ron was saying, that, you know, this kind of investigative journalism is needed right now and will be for a long time.
So what's your message to others thinking about getting into this?
It's really hard. And there's no, I don't think I have good advice on how to navigate that just yet. Other than the fact of just keeping the end goal in mind and just, you know, keeping the communities and the people and the families that you're reporting on centered, and not getting lost in, you know, the bureaucracy of like, I've called this PIO 7 times and they're still not going to give me the document that I want. And, you know, really just bringing it and grounding it back in the fact that you're reporting on real people who have gone through a lot, and, you know, and that you want to get their story out there.
So your work and the work of this entire team has already led to a number of stories that the Associated Press has put out, and it's clearly making an impact around the country. But you're not done yet. You have more to come. That are more stories from the Associated Press, more stories from Howard Center reporters, and there's also an April 30th major film coming out on Frontline. And I thought we would take a moment to watch a short preview of that film coming out and give you a sense of what's coming.
The project is about uncovering hidden death.
In collaboration with the Associated Press, an investigation into police restraint.
You find so many families left with unanswered questions. He could not have died. People know about deaths in police interactions, but no one really knows the extent of it. Or real world practitioners.
Should we
who are dealing
restart
with
the
the real
video
world
so
problem.
that we have
It's
a
important to
picture?
identify what went wrong and who was responsible.
Sorry about that technical glitch. We're going to get that taken care of.
While we're waiting for this,
While we're waiting, I just want to give a quick shout out to a couple of people here in the audience who also had very, very important roles in this wonderful project. Juliet Ryle was also a graduate from Cronkite with her master's degree in investigative journalism. Also participated in this project. We have Sam Ellison in the back, holding up the rear. Also participated in this project and just had his story published. So congratulations for that. And Ron, as part of Ron's team, we have Jacques Biot from the AP here with us as well, who has a story coming out in the coming months that has some Arizona themes to it. So do be on the lookout for that.
and we may end up having to come back to the video. So while
The project is about uncovering hidden death.
In collaboration with the Associated Press, an investigation into police restraint.
You find so many families left with unanswered questions. He could not have died. People know about deaths in police interactions, but no one really knows the extent of it. Or real world practitioners who are dealing with a real world problem.
It's important to identify what went wrong and who was responsible.
Premieres Tuesday, April 30th, 10, 9 Central, only on PBS.
So Serginia,
The project is about
watching it again. All right. So you're the guy that you got all these reporters, you know, you got reporters at the Howard Center, so you got reporters at the Associated Press. They do all this work for a long time. It's detailed work. And you're tasked with somehow putting this together into a documentary film that is, I thought it was an hour, but I was corrected earlier. There's commercials too, I guess, or there's breaks that have to go in.
52 minutes.
52 minutes. So you got to pull it together in 52 minutes. How do you do it?
I mean, that's still the question. We're still finishing the film as we speak. We're still planning to do one more interview. Just came back from Boston a couple of days ago. Did a couple of interviews there as well. So this is going to be 3 weeks from now, and it's basically been a year that I've been on this project. And I'd heard about it, like, you know, through the grapevine, like, oh yeah, there are some reporters that are working on this police project, but I had no idea what was going on really, until I started to join the first meetings. And it was very daunting. There was a lot that was coming at me. I'm not from the US, so there was a big learning curve when it comes to, reporting on law enforcement. And so it's like, okay, how am I going to indeed, like you were asking, like, how am I going to pull all these different strands together, and make this into like a cohesive story? And so I started basically having all these different conversations, one-on-ones with reporters, to basically see what they're and learn more about their reporting line, what they've been doing for the basically year and a half to 2 years prior to when I joined. And through that, and through also like going through these weekly meetings, I started to see some patterns, and started hearing some phrases, like prone restrained, which is one of the forces, or the types of forces that law enforcement uses, that was seen quite often. It's like, okay, that might be something to focus on. I had heard about sedation. That's something that aside from the case from Elijah McClain in Colorado, I'd never really heard of. So I got very curious and like, okay, what's that all about? So we have, on one hand, we have prone restraint, which is kind of like the most common use, or that we've seen in the project, use of force, and we see force sedation, which is like really, really tiny. Like quite often, medical examiners don't even say that the force or that the sedation was the cause of death. So there were two things that I was like, okay, let's start with those, and then we'll continue as we go. We continue to report as we go. And we started with families, the families of the people who died. It sounds very basic, but that's where you get a lot already out of like, okay, who was this person? What happened in this particular situation? The first family that we interviewed was the family of a man named Taylor Ware. It was in Kansas City, Missouri. And the mother there was an incident that happened at a rest stop in Indiana. Police arrived. It was a mental health call. Police arrived. There was a struggle. He eventually died. And the mother feels very guilty for the fact that she was the one who called police. And so she didn't really want to have anything to do with this, didn't want to speak to the media, really. Her daughter was the one I had been in touch with. She was divorced from the father. So the dad was a little bit more forthcoming, and he wanted to speak. So we started with them. And then there was also an aunt who was there when the incident happened, and she had recorded this on her cell phone. And so we interviewed her, and the night before she had said like, well, actually Taylor's mom wants to come, and I think it will be good for her, kind of because she hasn't really spoken to a therapist or anything along those lines. So it will be good for her to see that there are people out there that are still working to get, to keep his name alive and to keep this case, out there. She indeed joined the next day. We filmed at the AP Bureau in Kansas City. She was sitting on the side. We were going over the event with the aunt, the moment when she showed what was on her cell phone. And at one point she just burst open, the mom, and started speaking. And we were, okay, are you sure? Do you really want to do this? She's like, yes, I really want to tell my story. So we turned the camera. We didn't even have a microphone on her. And she started telling her story. And it was really, to me, that's really when it started, actually, because it's kind of hard to say like why or what actually about it, but it was raw emotion. I think that was it. Raw emotion. The fact that this happened in 2019. Of course, we had the pandemic in between, so time wise, like, oh, when this did really happen, but it was really fresh still. So that was really kind of like where it really started for me. And then we continued meeting with families. Who met with another family that had no idea what really had happened to their son. That's the case of Hunter Turner, who's also in the presentation, his story. The family had thought for years that he died of a drug overdose, but the police might have been involved in that as well. And there were two AP reporters that we follow in the film that went to the family a couple days prior, and told them like, hey, we have some information about your son's death. do you want to learn more? They opened their house, they opened their door. A couple weeks later, the reporters went back, showed them the body cam footage for the first time, actually. And then I think it was a week or two later, I joined with a camera. And there was also the question, okay, how is this going to go? They're a very conservative family in the middle of Tennessee, very pro-police, very pro-Trump. So personally, I was like, okay, how is this going to go with me being there? And secondly, they're also like very distrustful of the media. So they have already opened their doors to these two reporters, but they are writers. And then here am I with a big camera and actually wanted to do another interview a couple weeks later with two cameras and lights and microphones and all of that. How is that gonna fly with them? So that was it was not difficult, but it was a process. It was a process for sure.
And you go in with the lights, not on the first.
No, that was just one camera, me in the corner, letting the AP reporters and the mother having their conversation with the mother. That was also actually on what was supposed to be Hunter's birthday. So it was a special day as well. Yeah. But because of that, I think the mother was not really thinking about like, oh yeah, there's a camera there, there is a reporter there. She was really in her own kind of like emotions, like thinking about Hunter. There is an urn with his ashes like in the living room, so she kept looking at that. So I think she was really having that moment between the reporters, Hunter herself, her own emotions, not really thinking about me being there with the camera. And then 2 weeks later, we went back with two cameras, like a full crew. But they're also very big on riding their motorcycles in the Appalachian Mountains, which is absolutely beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we did was first went on a motorcycle ride with them to break the ice, to get them comfortable with the camera. And then the day after, we went back and to really have the sit-down interview with them.
It's so interesting to hear how you invested the time.
Yes. Yeah.
You didn't just go there and say, let's roll with camera.
Oh, no, not at all. Yeah, it takes a while. And especially, when you're dealing with people who lost someone, it's not like, hey, you stick a microphone under their nose and you let them go. You give them time to get used to you as a person. And yeah.
So I want to transition now over to Maud and over to Tears of Christopher to talk about the students' role in all of this. Tirza had also gotten her master's of investigative journalism degree here at Cronkite, then went through a year-long fellowship, just finished this up at National Public Radio in their investigations team, so doing some big stuff. And I'm interested in hearing about the interaction between students, between AP reporters, between editors. And Maud, maybe you can kick us off. I mean, what was that like? How do you bridge the gap? You spent a long time in your career at the Associated Press. You oversaw and edited investigations when you were there. How do you bring your experience and help your students rise to the level of what the AP needs? How did that all work?
Well, the four reporters who Ron spoke about had been some of my reporters when I was an investigative editor at the AP. And one of them approached me early in 2022 and said he wanted to talk about the possibility of working with the Howard Center students in collaboration on this huge project. And I think because I knew how excellent these reporters were and how much I loved and knew about the excellence of the AP, I discussed it first with Lauren, and then we brought it upstairs to the dean's office to talk about what would be in it for the students. And I knew that because of my own experiences growing up in the AP, I knew that the experience that the Howard Center students would get working directly hand in hand with the AP investigative reporters was going to be unlike anything that I or Lauren could give them just ourselves. I mean, I think we gave them great experiences, but they would be getting in on sort of the sausage making of investigative journalism with some of the best practitioners in the country. And in fact, when I think about the time that our students spent working on this project, yes, they filed hundreds or thousands of FOIAs and fought FOIA records and built databases and entered databases and did interviews. But the thing that sticks out in my memory were the weekly meetings that the students from the Howard Center would have with all the AP reporters working on the project. And the students would bring to the AP reporters every week the new information that they were learning or the new trend lines that they were seeing. And those trend lines informed what became the final AP project, along obviously with the input of the AP reporters themselves. But it was really wonderful and heartwarming to watch the interaction between the Howard Center students and the AP reporters, and lots of ongoing relationships grew out of that time.
So Tirza, you're a student in the Howard Center at the time, and as a student, you're now thrown in to work with really veteran reporters and journalists, and there's one reporter named Ryan Foley, who's an Associated Press veteran reporter in the Midwest, who you actually went and traveled with, you went into the field with. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that experience, what you learned, and maybe how you applied it after you graduated.
Yeah, for sure. So I went to Las Vegas with AP reporter Ryan Foley to cover a law enforcement training conference. And my role was to create photos and video at this 2-day event. And first off, I mean, it was fantastic learning experience, getting to shadow an experienced reporter like Ryan. But at the conference, more so, there were many attendees who were very transparent about their distrust in media. So, you know, as soon as Ryan and I would introduce ourselves as journalists, there would be people who wouldn't even want to talk to us after that. But something I learned, and it was a big takeaway for me, was how Ryan would just stand his ground and keep being curious, keep asking questions. And that threw some people off because, you know, at the end of the day, he was just being curious. And so no matter what they said, and they did say some things that were not very comfortable to hear, but he just stood his ground and kept asking questions. And that was a really useful skill for me to learn because, like you mentioned, Mark, after I graduated, I was a Roy Howard Fellow at NPR for a year with their investigations desk, and I worked on a couple investigations on federal prisons, on immigration. And as you may guess, I had multiple interviews where the sources just didn't, you know, want to talk to me, or they were very, you know, distrusting of the media. And I just did what Ryan did, and that helped me get the answers. I think that was one of the key takeaways, but it was a great learning experience.
So I want to talk, Tirza, and follow up, because you also played a big role in really unearthing video evidence and reviewing some video evidence that some bad things have happened. You know, when sometimes people would just call for help and they'd end up in some really sticky situations, and sometimes they'd end up dead. And you got the video evidence, and I think why it's so important when I look at this project, one of the really extraordinary things that this project did was if you haven't seen it, you need to look this up. This project, as it was deployed, merges text, merges audio, merges video seamlessly in the deployment digitally, and it really gives a reader, a viewer, the experience of what had happened. And I think core to creating that kind of experience for the audience to understand what and feel what's actually happening here takes the digging through the evidence and the finding of the video. And can you talk about what that was like, seeing it and experiencing it for the first time?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I did was go through all the cases where we had any sort of video evidence and watch, you know, hours of like body cam footage, CCTV, camera footage, etc. And it was really hard. Like, you know, Nathan mentioned, you know, I think constantly remembering the kind of impact that this project is going to have was really helpful. Sometimes, you know, I needed to take a walk because we were doing this 9 to 5, but yeah, seeing the project out now, you know, seeing all the visual elements and seeing how powerfully it's, you know, showing the lack of documentation of such a massive problem is very rewarding for the kind of hard work that we had to do.
So Lauren, some students got to work alongside, sort of in tandem with AP reporters on this project, but students also led the journalism in lanes that they were given. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what ASU's role was and what the assignment was. And what the assignment was that students actually led the reporting on. They weren't just working side by side with AP reporters.
Yeah, that's right. We have Taylor Stevens, we have Juliet in the audience now, Juliet Ryle. We have a number of students who are a part of the first semester where we collaborated with the AP. And as part of that assignment, we were basically tasked with taking responsibility for determining how many of these deaths had taken place in the state of Nevada. We already had Jacques representing and focusing on Arizona, so they needed, but the AP reporter in Las Vegas, who was actually very helpful to us, was very busy dealing with all the Las Vegas shenanigans. And so we took on that responsibility, which was a huge responsibility. We had to not only identify cases, but we had to follow this methodology that we had all agreed upon between the AP reporters and basically ensure that everybody who was reporting for a state was following that same methodology. So our students followed that same methodology, writing public records requests to different kinds of law enforcement agencies, medical examiners' offices to try to determine what cases would meet our criteria. And that was a really grueling process. And I think one of my proudest moments as a faculty member here at Cronkite and in the Howard Center was a public records feat that, I mean, Taylor and Juliet will probably remember this with our medical examiners. We basically taught the Clark County medical examiner how to use their software because we got records from a different medical examiner in a different county in Nevada. And when we got those records in another county was telling us, oh, we don't know how to use the software. We can't do a search like that. We went back to the first guys and said, hey, what software do you use? Could you put in like keyword search terms? We got them to explain to us how they did the search so we could then teach the other medical examiner's office how to do a search. I think we even shared that tip with Jacques. Jacques got some traction out of that as well with some of his Arizona cases. So I was just, like dying of pride seeing our students overcome this gridlock and releasing records that ended up being, incredibly essential to us being able to show which cases fit our criteria in Nevada.
So those records though that you got, this is really interesting to me. Some of the things that you found in those records that you fought so hard for and that the students fought so hard for, there was something that came out in the medical examiner's cause of deaths, this terminology that I was not familiar with, the excited delirium. Can you talk about, there were clearly excited delirium cases that the medical examiner would find led to the death of individuals in police custody, but you followed up with some questions about, you wanted a comprehensive list of this strange way of death.
Yeah. So I had never heard this term before, and I don't know if any of y'all have either, but excited delirium. We kept coming across this term in police reports, medical examiner reports, that police have an interaction with somebody and the person just drops dead from excited delirium. It has nothing to do with the police restraint. It's just this ailment that strikes you when police are nearby. So we actually went and asked several medical examiners while we were doing our reporting, can you provide cases of excited delirium that didn't involve law enforcement? And we did not have success in getting any cases that did not involve law enforcement that were cited as excited delirium cases. And I think the film actually gets into this, right?
Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I know I kind of had to laugh a little bit because, what is excited delirium? And we've asked this many times, and every time we kind of get like a different type of answer. But one of the, actually, Tirsa was mentioning this conference in Las Vegas. We went the year after. We went again to talk to a couple of law enforcement experts and people in law enforcement to talk about, like, excited delirium, and ask questions about, like, okay, well, what about excited delirium in other countries? Like, you're an academic, you're a researcher. Do you go to conferences abroad and talk to other, like, researchers about excited delirium? And there was no real answer there. Yeah, it's we go into it in the film, but in that sense, excited delirium is slowly, getting out of the door. But that doesn't mean that there are no deaths that are attributed to the characteristics, so to say, of excited delirium. So it's excited delirium by a different name. So that will make it probably in the future a little bit more difficult to find those cases if they have a different name, but then still attributed to the same kind of, like, things that they are seeing in the field, that police officers are seeing in the field and describing in their police report, and that then being taken over by the medical examiner.
And just like Colorado just became the second state that has banned the use of that term in medical reports. Excited delirium. California is the other. But broadly, excited delirium is like the person is in a struggle with police. They're either on drugs or something, and their body just is overwhelmed by the struggle and the drugs and all of that stuff. It's a lethal combination that they just drop dead. And that's broadly what excited delirium is.
But it can only happen during encounters
It
with police.
only seems to happen in encounters with police. It does not seem to happen where a person is just walking down Central Avenue and just drop dead of, like, excited delirium.
So is it too far to say that this is being used, that the police agencies, not all of them, I don't want to broad brush here, I want to be careful, but ones that you encountered, more than one agency, were in a way using the medical examiners to cover for what was happening?
I wouldn't necessarily go as far as say, like, oh yeah, they're doing it on purpose to cover, but it is when they're using it when there's, like, no other explanation. When every other explanation seems to be like, oh, they can't go there and they can't really say it's the police, so we go for excited delirium. But quite often you still see an intersection of drugs and mental health.
So Taylor Stevens, so I really want to hear your reaction, because you had so many different roles in this project. You were a student, you graduated, you worked for the AP, you fact-checked this piece. Did you uncover these cases of excited delirium? And can you walk us through the different roles that you played and the different ways that you interacted through those roles with the investigative reporting that happened?
Yeah, we did identify several cases in Nevada where excited delirium was cited as either a cause of death or as a contributing cause of death. And it was really interesting to kind of get all of those documents. That was one of our goals as part of this project, is treating each case as its own little universe, where we tried to get every sort of documentation that we could on it. So we tried to get, did the district attorney look at this? Did they issue a report? Was there an inquiry by the police department? Get the police report, get the coroner's report and the medical examiner's report. If there was a lawsuit, we looked at the depositions, we looked at the exhibits. We tried to, for each case, pull in as much information as we possibly could obtain on that case. And in some cases, due to suppression in several states, we don't have as much information as we would like to have. And in some cases, we were never able to determine, did a case meet our criteria or not? So in Nevada, my role as one of the students in the Howard Center was to try and unearth as many cases as we could, using a methodology that the AP had created to be as thorough as possible to make sure we swept up as many of these cases as we could. And we identified in Nevada 12 deaths between 2012 and 2021, most of those with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And we did find that those non-shooting deaths were being treated differently in many cases than shooting deaths, because Nevada has a really clear process for, when an officer fires a gun and that person dies, there's a really clear process for accountability. But when these cases, somebody dies after prone restraint or after a taser was used, we found that there wasn't as clear of a process for some of these cases, and they didn't always receive the same level of accountability. And so that was one of our major findings that we had in Nevada. As for you mentioned, I did stay on with the project. I had the opportunity to continue working with the AP and had several different roles. I was a fact checker, a lead fact checker on the database, as you mentioned. Also worked as a reporter and helped, identify more cases in other states, log other cases in other states. And I was involved in kind of the final sweep through to try and make sure we'd gotten as much as we could, and helped identify an additional 120 cases or so that we added to the database in the last few months as we were nearing publication.
So thank you so much for that. I think one of the other things that I want to really explore with you, Taylor, is to go under the hood of how you helped fact check some of this. This is a major project, and there's more than 1,000 cases that are found of people who died after having some kind of encounter that was supposed to be non-lethal with police officers. That's a lot of cases. There's a big interactive database that people can see online now, and you check the facts. And I want to get into the weeds here for a minute, because I think sometimes in this era where the public in surveys does not trust journalists as much as they used to, I think it's really important to talk about the level of care and investment that this entire editorial team put at getting every little detail right. And you were sort of at ground zero of some of this. Can you tell us what you did to make sure you got the facts right?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as we worked on this project, AP valued getting the facts right above all else. And so this was a really important piece of this project. Basically, as I mentioned, we accumulated as many primary source documents for each of these cases as we possibly could. And from there, reporters went through and identified, and I'll use an example of types of force in each case. So a reporter go through a case and say, okay, they used a taser, they pepper sprayed this person, they kicked them and punched them, and would log all of that force. And so my role in this part of the project was to go back over those entries and ensure, yes, that's correct. They did use all of that force. And so what we did is went to the primary source documents to verify that information. And sometimes there were questions, sometimes somebody makes an allegation in a lawsuit that isn't confirmed with the primary source documentation that we have. And so that would be a case where I, as the fact checker, would say, we need some other way to substantiate this. How do you know that they used this force? And if we couldn't substantiate it with primary source documents, then we wouldn't use it. So that meant anything that was in a news report. So say a news report said this person was tased, but we couldn't independently verify that, we wouldn't have included that in the database. Same for an allegation of force in a lawsuit. That was not enough to meet our standards. And so I think that's one of the things that really makes this database unique and incredibly ambitious, is that it is based on primary source documentation. It's not an aggregation of material from other news reporters. We double checked everything. We made sure we had everything substantiated on our own. And so it was a long process. It took months to get through all of these cases, and we had a lot of back and forth with different reporters. It meant watching a lot of videos, reading through a lot of documents, having really granular conversations about, the difference between a hobble restraint and a leg restraint, and how are we going to put that in the data, or making sure, was that taser used in dart mode, or was it used in probe mode, or do we not know? And so having a lot of those conversations, and everybody on the team worked really collaboratively through that process to sort of refine our thinking around how we were going to present this information in the database. And I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to, give it that level of detail and attention. And I think that ultimately the project is much better off for it. And the public information is much better off for it.
And it's something that's really a signature, and probably one of the things that I'm the most proud of, honestly, with being linked to and associated with the Howard Center here, is the level of what we teach, what we teach today. Lauren, what you and I teach today, Maud, what you have done here since the beginning is the attention to detail, the fact checking, the footnoting. We're instilling serious habits, and I wonder briefly if Maud and Lauren, you could just talk about the importance of doing that in these projects and why it's important.
Sure. You want to
Go
get
ahead,
us?
Lauren.
No, go ahead, Maud.
You're gonna laugh what I'm gonna say, Lauren. What comes to mind is the old "Don't let the camel get his nose under the tent." I used to tell this to the students all the time from day one, and what I meant by that was, if you get one little thing wrong in an investigation, even if it ends up being a rather inconsequential little thing, you undermine the entire effort and you run the risk of destroying your credibility or handing your critics a way to destroy your credibility. And so in the Howard Center, we do preach attention to detail and original documentation and multiple sources of verification. And we have a very elaborate fact-checking process that we teach the students how to use so that they can fact-check each other even as we fact-check them. Lauren?
Yeah, I'll just add an anecdote to kind of underscore what Maud was saying, because yes, this is a very big part of the teaching at the Howard Center. Your story isn't finished when you turn in your draft. Your story has a lot of work still ahead of it in terms of going through our fact-checking process, our legal review process. So I'll just tell a little anecdote that earlier today, I got a text message from a former student who had been a part of our lithium project with the Howard Center. And she sent me a photo of 2 of her binders just filled with primary documents, separated with dividers that was identifying how she was organizing her fact check binder. And everything that she had a, detailed, documented, well-structured, well-organized. And I was like a proud mama.
I think we still have like the lithium version of those binders back in the Howard Center with the post-it notes color coded and everything.
Yes.
So that's, look, this is important stuff. This is great journalism. We have investigative journalism students here in the audience. We have faculty in the audience. Let's open it up to some of you if you have questions for.
Can I add one
Sure.
before we go there? Because I just want to also say, even for the film, like by the time that I started with the film, a lot of the students already went their own way. But there was a student, not from here, but from Maryland, who was in touch with an officer, and an officer who was involved in one of these deaths, and we had not, were able to get an interview or score an interview with an officer. And so that was really, really broke open that particular case, that she found this officer who was willing to go on camera and say, hey, I was involved in this death, but I was not trained. I did not know what I was doing. And so that really underscores the importance of the students in this project from beginning to end, including in our film. So I just really wanted to get that out.
Making an impact. Thank you for that. That's. If you do have a question for any of the panelists, please come up to the microphone because this session is being recorded. So, thinking about Ron, what the legacy of this project is. What do you hope for?
It's a tough question. I think that, at this stage, I try not to think too much about legacy, but just the fact that we get this information out. I mean, ultimately, I think the project has done a number of things, right? One, we've gotten this information out to the public. but more importantly, we were able to collect this information, as Taylor mentioned. We developed a methodology to actually, so it's transparent, so you can see exactly why we did what we did, why we included these things and not others, right? I think that's critically important, and I think that sets the stage for anybody else who wants to do this type of reporting, making that database searchable and public. I think is a public service. Equally important, a lot of the video that we had gotten in this project had never seen the light of day.
Mhm.
So that was important by making that public, but even more so by providing that to a lot of local news outlets that had not had this information for, and giving that to them really, I think, turned the tide, because there's a reporter who said that, look, I've been trying to get this information and I couldn't get it. But it also feeds into this thing about supporting the local news ecosystem and giving those folks access to this kind of thing that is really costly. I mean, I've seen my budget, so I know what it costs. So it's, I think all of those things will add to the legacy of this, and I would hope that it becomes a defining piece of journalism that people look back on and say, look, this is why investigative reporting is important, and this is why we need it. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it takes time, but this is why we need to continue to do this type of work.
The audience.
Hi, friends. Pauline Arriaga, a professor here at the Cronkite School. Hello. I love waving at everyone. I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but is this going to be a live, living, breathing database? Are you going to continue attempting to capture these cases and putting them out there for the public and for other media to report on?
It is something that we're in discussions about. We haven't, we're still in discussion about that. I do think that it would be something that is valuable. And I don't think that, you would just want to do a one-off for a particular product.
But it's worth saying what has already happened with this data. It wasn't just this big project,
Right.
That the AP did. You actually did something that was very cool, which was you have this local initiative where you actually trained local markets on how to use the data.
Right.
Can you talk about that? Because you wanted to get this information out to other journalists
Right.
in local areas.
Well, again, I think that, people like Katie Orm, who is works on our local news initiatives at the AP, to really give her a shout out, because she leads the efforts to get this information to providing this localized guides. Here, what the laws say in your state. Here's this information that we got. Here's how you use it. So there was a thing that actually was posted on, the site that AP members can actually download, and there was an audio version of it as well that you could just download. In addition, there was a meeting that was held, like, called them office hours, where local media could interact with the folks working on the project and ask questions about the data, about video, about questions that they have. That's, somewhat of a unique thing that the AP provides to, local media outlets. Again, as we all know, that those outlets have been decimated by cuts, and very few of them actually have the ability to do this type of thing on their own. So this project really serves, I think, as a model for what can be done for similar projects like this, that you're not just thinking about, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to look great, but how do we help media in general to be able to pursue these types of things. And I think, you know, it's also incentivize other folks to start looking into these cases. And now they have a blueprint for what to look for
And a head start.
and a head start. Yes.
Hi all. My name is Sam. I worked on this project when I was in my last year of undergrad here at the Cronkite School. The project just came out a few weeks ago, so my question may not have any relevance yet, but I'm curious if anyone has seen or heard any feedback or reactions from police since the publication. And I guess furthermore, has there been any accountability for any of the officers who have been involved in these deaths?
I did see that there was a television station in Wisconsin that had a police chief on talking about the play. And, you know, to his credit, he wasn't defensive and saying, hey, you know what, this is like BS or just like media got, you know, he's pretty thoughtful in how he talked about it. I mean, he just said that, look, I mean, which the stories themselves address, like cops are in these situations that a lot of them are simply not trained for, right? So you have to remember that. And so I thought it was really, you know, like most of these things, whenever you see like, oh, okay, they've got this guy, police guy talking about it, he's probably gonna like slam it and like, oh, they don't really understand. But I thought he did a really good job in that. And then now on the Roland Martin thing, there was a former police detective who also, you know, talked about this is, I mean, not the Roland Martin thing. It was the MSNBC. He was a former police detective. The Roland Martin thing was differently, but in terms of accountability, I mean, I think that, look, for me, I think the accountability is a public awareness that this happens, you know, and that policies are examined. Sometimes it takes time for this to happen. This only been out a week, and there's more coming. So, but I do think that it should put law enforcement agencies to, to actually examine their policies, and local governments to examine like their policies and really understand like why these happen, and that is not happening in isolation, right? But I've also seen like, you know, some just local DAs thinking perhaps we should look into these types of things. So I think we're still gathering like all of that stuff. The reactions are continue to come in. You know, every day there's like new reports that we see, like news outlets are doing it. So it's a slow drip sometimes, but I think ultimately we will see, as we've saw with the MSNBC thing, that it wasn't even about the project. It was about another case and how this was similar to that type of thing, that the video that they had told a different stories than what the police had written in their encounter with these folks. And so that became like, this is why, you know, the project, that in of itself, I think is important.
And we had 2 interviews last week for the project, obviously. And one was with a police expert, someone who's been a police officer in Providence, Rhode Island for 20 years, now trains across the country. And he was really impressed by this. And he said it's really going to be like helpful and it'd be a tool. And we had an interview also with an EMS director more for the part about like the sedation part in the film. And he was equally impressed and also shocked by the numbers. Like he was like, well, I think that, I thought there were going to be, a couple of deaths following sedation around the country, but he didn't know it was at the number that we were able to capture. So people out in the field are pretty impressed by the project. And like Ron was saying, like it's still trickling in. So especially with so many things still coming, we're not done yet.
My name's Christopher Lamaku. I'm a master's investigative journalism student here. We're working on a project that deals with a lot of, fact gathering, FOIAs, things like that. I think it was kind of alluded to as well. That was there any point in the research in the interviews where like some of the statements that the police or other individuals in positions of authorities said that contradicted what was found in some of the FOIA requests or any type of other information that was gathered on some of these projects?
I think I'll let Taylor answer that. I think she was involved in a lot more of those. And Nathan, and if you guys want to jump in as well, but I'll let them answer that.
Yeah, there were definitely times when we would read through a police report and it would say, oh, we guided this person to the ground and we quickly rolled them into the recovery position afterward. And then they stopped breathing and we took them to the hospital and they were declared deceased at that point. And you think, okay, maybe this case doesn't quite fit our criteria then. And then you watch the video and see, okay, they were tackled to the ground, held in the prone position with a knee in their back for 5 minutes, left in prone and not rolled over until, at which point they had stopped breathing. And so we did see, and that's kind of speaking generally, not about a specific case, but we did see many examples of times where the police report and the video that we obtained did not match up. And I think that really speaks to the importance of obtaining as many primary source documents as you can and comparing the narratives that you have. Because, when you just have the police report to go off of, that's only one narrative. But when you have the body cam footage and you have the district attorney's report and you have depositions, that provides such a wealth of information for us to gain a more complete picture of what actually happened. And, countless times where we did develop a more thorough understanding based on that information than we would have based solely on the police narrative alone.
Next question. I can maybe speak to that as well a little bit. I'm gonna keep plugging the film, so watch it April 30th. But the officer that I was just speaking about that was found by one of the students at UMD, we went to interview him in southern Georgia back in October. At the time, we did not have any body cam, so we were really reliant on his narrative of the event. And the way he was telling the story was like, oh yeah, well, this is how it happened. He was pretty open about it. So, and then we requested the body cam. Well, we knew that there was dash cam video. So we requested that, but we also got body cam video. And part of me was like, oh yeah, if we're gonna get it, like maybe it's like completely different. And then we finally got it, and it was still a surprise. It was still not exactly the way he told it. Again, it's not like he did something malicious, that he was really out there to kill the guy, but the way he was telling the story as if it was like a huge struggle, as if they were fighting constantly and the guy was coming back up and attacking him again. That was not the way the story happened. And if we did not have had the body cam, we would have run that story. So once we got it, we had to like make some cuts in there. But the same goes also for a witness who was across the street. She also was saying certain things about what happened in that moment. And that was also not completely the case. So there's also an element to, your memory. And that goes for everyone, whether you're a police officer or not, that when you're in a chaotic situation like that and you come back like later on, like you remember it differently than it actually was. But you will see in the film that there are definitely cases where the way what Taylor was saying, it was written in the police report, is not what we see on the body cam.
Go ahead.
Hi, so nice to meet you guys. My name is Ishan. I'm also a student in the Masters in Investigative program with Chris and Sam as well. You guys mentioned a few times, people really don't trust the media these days. It seems to be a growing issue. So I'm curious both, what is your advice as individual journalists? What can we do when we're approaching communities or groups that feel that they've been particularly burned by the media? And what can newsrooms as a whole do to build better relationships with their communities?
So a couple of things. Good question, by the way. I think that so first of all, I think we have to also have an understanding that when we talk about trust in the media is decline. We also have to acknowledge the fact that there have been communities forever who've never trusted the media. So this is not a new phenomenon, right? There, I think it's probably broader than it has been in the past. But we do have to acknowledge that some people just haven't. The other thing I think with a lot of this is that when you go into communities, whatever communities, I've been doing this for 36 years, and which is a lot, by the way. That kind of makes me old, but wherever I've gone, and I think that I'm not the only reporter who do this. I worked in rural Virginia, right, covering coal country, right, and very few people look like me in coal country, right. But what I did was the same thing that I did when I actually had to cover the Freddie Gray thing in Baltimore, because a lot of those people did look like me. But the thing is the same, that I didn't approach people by just going up to them and start asking questions. You build that relationship even when you have a few minutes, in that you're talking to people as people and not as subjects who are there to give you a quote, but that you are genuinely talking to folks and understanding that, what, in that moment, like there's probably pain there, and you want to acknowledge that, right? And also, I think that there are times when people have assumptions about like media and who we are, and that we're, people talk about the media elite and stuff like that, right? So I'll talk about myself, right? I'm from rural Mississippi, right? I'm from a place with like 270 people, Lauderdale, Mississippi. Proud citizen of Lauderdale, Mississippi. But one of the first things I got as a present as a kid was a rifle, right? There were no black radio stations where I go. I listened to country music and metal and rock music, right? I learned how to play guitar by listening to Angus Young from AC/DC, right? But if you look at me, you think black dude, right? And so, but so the thing is, when you talk to people, you get to understand them. And as Virginia was talking about the couple in Bristol, Tennessee, I had a similar situation with a lady in Virginia a long time ago who just, she really just disliked the media, but she was playing something, right? And I was like, oh, that's like Rick Nelson, right? Which is popular in the 50s or 60s, right? And she was like, how do you know like Rick Nelson? Like, you're a kid, right? Like, could you possibly know Rick Nelson? When I was a kid, you would come home, but they would have these commercials on like, buy these old albums by these artists that most people don't remember. And so I just remembered those things. And we just started talking about Rick Nelson and Fats Domino and all of these old things. And we just had this interview for like hours, but this is a lady who just hated media, right? But ultimately, you are not media, you're you. And you have to have people approach you as an individual. I don't know what the local television station or radio station or newspaper has done to you, but just talk to me, right? And I think that's how we build the trust to get people to talk to us about what's happening to them, even in their toughest moments.
So it's 6:30 and there's probably some hungry people here. And the good news is this, is that we don't have to end this conversation right now, because in fact, what this whole event is about really amplifying and spreading the word and really getting this conversation out further, because our country needs to be talking about this subject a lot more. And those of you who are here in person will get to talk about it with these journalists over some snacks. So please enjoy, please continue the conversation. We'll look for that April 30th Frontline major film event that's coming out. I can't wait to see it. We'll look for more stories out of the Howard Centers, more stories out of the AP, more stories out of the local reporters that are seeing this, working with the data. This is only the beginning, and that's really the exciting part. So thank you very much for all of the journalism and all this conversation. And we'll wrap.